In the spacious auditorium of the school, it was densely packed with people. The glances that everyone cast at me were all filled with loathing and contempt. I heard someone whispering in a hushed voice. He actually has the nerve to come to the graduation ceremony. If I were him, I would have been too ashamed to live. Another person chimed in, exactly. After all, with a wealthy family background, one can act recklessly. These words, like sharp knives, pierced straight into my ears. When the news of my plagiarizing Su Yuxuan's scientific research achievements spread, the way they looked at me instantly changed completely. Not a single person had the slightest doubt about the truth of this matter. In their hearts, Su Yuxuan had always been an extremely outstanding figure. He also had an especially good popularity in school. And I, relying on my identity as a rich second generation, not only targeted Su Yuxuan everywhere on weekdays. Now I am even accused of plagiarizing his scientific research achievements. But how could they know that everything I did was because Su Yuxuan was the first love of my girlfriend, Xie Yin? Facing the piercing stares and whispers of the crowd, I could only secretly clench the USB drive in my pocket that contained the crucial evidence. Just as I was about to open my mouth to say a few words of justice for myself, at that very moment, I saw Xie Yin and Su Yuxuan walking side by side. There was a seemingly gentle smile on Su Yuxuan's face, and he said to the people around, all right. Zhou Yi was just confused for a moment. His words, which seemed to be for my relief, were actually like a nail, firmly nailing the charge of plagiarism onto me. Xie Yin, on the other hand, gazed at Su Yuxuan with a face full of heartache and said softly, Yuxuan, you are just too kind. She continued, Zhou Yi has committed plagiarism. A thief like him doesn't deserve you to speak for him at all. Hearing Xie Yin's words, my heart seemed to be severely struck by a heavy hammer, and the pain was unbearable. Sensing my sorrowful eyes, Xie Yin's face instantly turned extremely ugly. She turned her head away in disgust and said coldly, Zhou Yi, stop looking at me with such disgusting eyes. She continued, it seems as if I'm the one who's sorry for you. Clearly, you are the one who's sorry for Yuxuan. She finally said, after knowing each other for so many years, I never realized that you are actually such a person. My heart ached even more. I could endure and not care about all the accusations from others. But Xie Yin's words were like a sharp blade, piercing straight into the depths of my heart. Xie Yin and I grew up together as childhood sweethearts. Doesn't she know exactly what kind of person I am? I really didn't want to look at them any longer, and turned to leave this embarrassing and controversial place. However, as soon as I turned around, Xie Yin suddenly shouted loudly to stop me. Zhou Yi, since everyone is in the auditorium, you should come on stage now and publicly apologize to Yuxuan, otherwise. I looked at Xie Yin with complete disappointment, and saw that her hand was still affectionately holding Su Yuxuan's arm. At this moment, they looked more like a deeply affectionate couple. Indeed, the bond of childhood sweethearts could ultimately not withstand the suddenly emerging heaven-sent love. The deep affection between Xie Yin and me for more than 20 years seemed so vulnerable at this moment. But I was really puzzled in my heart. Since Xie Yin was so infatuated with Su Yuxuan, why did she still be with me? With this question in mind, I opened my mouth and asked, why? Before I could finish my words, Xie Yin impatiently interrupted me, with an extremely cold tone. If you don't publicly apologize to Yuxuan, we'll break up. She continued, if it's not your thing, why not return it to others? Zhou Yi, don't be too selfish in life. I nodded silently, and slowly loosened my hand, that was tightly holding the USB drive in my pocket. Yes, some things really should be returned. I turned around and stepped onto the stage step by step, solemnly handing the USB drive to the teacher in charge of screen playback. Then, I reached out and picked up the microphone, my voice a bit low yet with a hint of determination. Dear teachers and classmates, before this graduation ceremony begins, please allow me to deal with the personal matter first. I continued, I want to report Su Yuxuan. He plagiarized my scientific research achievements, and even framed me for plagiarizing his. As soon as these words were spoken, the whole audience was shocked. Xie Yin even rushed onto the stage instantly, and slapped me hard across the face. She shouted loudly, Zhou Yi, what nonsense are you talking about? At this time, the screen behind me had already started to play the contents of the USB drive. It detailed all the materials of my scientific research achievements, from the meticulous outline to some discarded drafts, leaving nothing out. These irrefutable materials were sufficient to prove my innocence. I had never plagiarized Su Yuxuan's scientific research achievements at all. After all, such detailed content could not be casually copied. Su Yuxuan's face instantly turned as pale as paper. Beads of sweat rolled down from his forehead, and his whole body was trembling uncontrollably. In the face of this ironclad evidence, the expressions of the crowd also became extremely complicated. I stared firmly at Xie Yin and said slowly, Ian, I'm not a thief. This scientific research achievement truly belongs to me. Since the plagiarism incident occurred, Xie has been extremely angry. In front of many classmates, she mercilessly and loudly reprimanded me, calling me disgusting and a despicable thief. I don't care how others view me, but I'm only afraid that Xie will leave me because of this unfounded misunderstanding. She has always detested those who lie and are vain. So, I desperately searched for evidence everywhere, determined to clear myself of this unwarranted charge. However, when I looked at Xie angry appearance, and then at the evidence I had painstakingly found, I suddenly realized that Xie was no longer the person I loved deeply in my memory. She had changed, becoming so unfamiliar. Xie turned a deaf ear to my words, and just looked at Su Yuxuan with heartache. Subsequently, she said to me angrily, "Zhou, I have never required you to be as outstanding as Yuxuan." She continued, "But I only expect you to be an upright person, and not engage in such despicable and deceitful acts." She finally said, "As your girlfriend, don't I know your capabilities? In order to shirk responsibility, you present this so-called truth. Or are you trying to deceive?" She added, "This scientific research achievement has always been jointly developed by Yuxuan and me with my accompaniment. I am the most powerful and real evidence." Xie words, transmitted clearly through the microphone, reached the ears of everyone present. I stared at her in shock and stood there dumbfounded for a moment, unable to utter a single word. Xie parents are both highly respected professors, and she herself is extremely outstanding. Moreover, she is my girlfriend. Her words carried far more weight than the evidence I had presented. Su Yuxuan's eyes were red-rimmed, looking extremely touched. Xie reached out and took the microphone from my hand, saying righteously, "Although Zhou is my boyfriend, I absolutely cannot shield his mistakes just because of that." Instantly, warm applause erupted from the audience. I stood alone, feeling an icy coldness all over my body. The bone-chilling cold spread from the bottom of my heart to every part of my body. At this moment, I finally deeply understood what it meant to have a heart as cold as ashes. Xie forcefully dragged me all the way to the backstage. She stared at me with complete disgust and said, "Zhou, can't you stop causing trouble?" I just looked back at her quietly, with my lips tightly shut, not saying a word. Xie then said, "Yuxuan spoke well of you before. How could you do such a thing? Do you know how much trouble this will cause him?" I suddenly shook off her hand, and a sharp pain shot through my chest as if struck by a heavy hammer. The emotion suppressed in my heart for this period of time suddenly burst out like a flood breaking through a dike. "Xie, we have known each other for more than 20 years. Don't you know what kind of person I am? I have never done such a thing. Why are you helping Su Yuxuan lie? I didn't plagiarize his scientific research achievements. Why won't you believe me?" Xie was silent for a long time. Then, with disappointment in her eyes, she looked at me and said, "Zhou, you're still pretending. I've seen how excellent Yuxuan is. How could you think that he would plagiarize your scientific research achievements? He didn't want to make a big deal out of it for my sake, but you just don't appreciate it." I let out a despairing laugh, with disappointment filling my eyes, and stared fixedly at Xie. Since Xie got together with Su Yuxuan, she has always unconditionally sided with him without principle. At that time, although I was extremely sad, I could barely understand. After all, Su Yuxuan was her boyfriend at that time. But later, after she broke up with Su Yuxuan and got together with me, she still unconditionally favored Su Yuxuan like this. I raised my hand to wipe the tears from the corners of my eyes and tried to calm my emotions, asking, "Xie, since you dislike me so much, why are you still with me?" In fact, I have long wanted to ask this question, but I have always buried it in my heart. I don't know when it started, but the way Xie looked at me became cold and disgusted. I don't understand what I did wrong. All I could do was treat her even better, hoping that she would see my sincerity and show me a little tenderness. During the year I was with Xie, she threw the carefully cooked meals I made into the trash can countless times in front of me. She often went out to eat with Su Yuxuan behind my back. Even because of a phone call from Su Yuxuan, she left me in bed with a high fever to accompany him on a trip. I always had a humble attitude, accommodating her time and time again. In her cold eyes, I silently swallowed all the grievances in my heart. And this time, I finally couldn't bear it anymore. Xie face flashed with surprise when she heard my words. Just then, Su Yuxuan appeared backstage. He walked slowly towards Xie with measured steps. As soon as Xie saw him, her eyes instantly softened like water, full of tenderness. Seeing this scene, I finally had to admit that Xie had never really loved me. I smiled self-deprecatingly. Su Yuxuan stood beside Xie and said to her in a low voice, "The school leaders are all here. Let's talk about things later." He paused and then continued, "Imin, I don't want you to have a quarrel with Zhou because of me. I'd rather suffer the grievance myself than make things difficult for you." Hearing this, Xie's eyes instantly turned red. Looking at the affectionate appearance of the two, I gave a cold laugh and turned to leave. Xie shouted behind me, "If it weren't for you back then, I wouldn't have broken up with Yuxuan. It was you who used my parents to force me to be with you." I wanted to turn around and ask Xie what she meant by these words, but the graduation ceremony was about to start. Helplessly, I could only suppress the confusion in my heart and return to my seat. Xie Yin and Su Yuxuan also followed and sat aside. The two of them were as intimate as a couple in love. I don't know what Su Yuxuan said to her. Xie Yin lowered her head, and a shy smile appeared on her face. Although my heart was already as cold as ashes, seeing this scene, a faint pain still welled up in my heart. I didn't dare to look anymore, for fear that I would break down on the spot. However, no matter how much I tried to empty my mind, I could still hear the people around me whispering about me. Looking at their contemptuous eyes, I could guess how they were scolding me without listening carefully. At this time, the school leader on the stage finished his speech and looked at me with a smile saying, "I've finished my speech. Now, I'll temporarily take over the work of the host and invite our outstanding graduate representative to give a leaving school speech." The school leader's words made the whole audience fall into a sudden silence. I subconsciously looked at Xie Yin and saw that she was looking at Su Yuxuan with a face full of heartache, while Su Yuxuan was lowering his head, constantly rubbing his eyes. Seeing that I didn't respond, the school leader called me again, "Zhou Yi." I quickly stood up and was just about to go on stage when Xie Yin's angry voice suddenly rang out. "How can a person with such a bad character like Zhou Yi still be an outstanding graduate representative? Is this fair to the rest of us?" I looked at them blankly. Their eyes were exactly the same as Xie Yin's, full of contempt and disgust. The school leader was also a bit puzzled and said, "We have all seen Zhou Yi's performance in school for the past 4 years. His scientific research achievement has greatly contributed to scientific research development. This was decided after careful discussion." Xie Yin raised her voice unhappily. "This scientific research achievement was plagiarized by Zhou Yi from Yuxuan. You can't be so partial to him, just because Zhou Yi's family is rich and donated several buildings to the school. What you are doing will only chill the hearts of other students. The school shouldn't allow such a person who fishes for fame and reputation to appear." My heart completely cooled down, and I asked coldly, "Then what do you want the leader to do?" Perhaps my expression was too cold. Xie Yin was slightly flustered, but when she saw Su Yuxuan beside her, her eyes instantly became firm again, and she said word by word, "A person like you should be expelled." Xie Yin's words made the students in the auditorium boil instantly. Listening to others echoing her, a proud smile curved on Xie Yin's lips. The words she said next, however, were like sharp knives piercing straight into my heart. "Leader, I know you are Zhou Yi's uncle, but you can't abuse your power to give Zhou Yi special treatment. I really don't understand what kind of charm Su Yuxuan has that can make Xie Yin abandon her principles without any bottom line like this. But I know that if I let Xie Yin incite like this, I will face the crisis of being expelled from school, and the school leader, my uncle, will also be punished by the school." I suddenly rushed onto the stage and shouted, "Xie Yin, you've gone too far." Seeing me hand something to the teacher, Xie Yin's face became uglier. Until the surveillance video was released, the color drained from her face instantly, and she was on the verge of collapse. In the surveillance video, Xie Yin, while I was not at home, secretly took Su Yuxuan into my house. They fiddled around in the study for a long time, and finally embraced each other. In the video, Xie Yin seemed a bit guilty and uneasy, saying, "Yuxuan, forget it. I'll give you my paper. After all, this is Zhou Yi's scientific research achievement." Su Yuxuan replied, "You mean Zhou Yi owes us this? Only in this way can I be qualified to stand in front of your parents and let them support us being together." After watching the surveillance video, the whole audience was in an uproar. I can't remember how this day ended. I only remember that Xie Yin and Su Yuxuan's faces were always extremely gloomy. Before long, they hurriedly fled the auditorium. When I got home, Xie Yin was already sitting on the sofa, waiting for me for a long time. Seeing me come back, she sneered and said, "Zhou Yi, you're very proud, aren't you?" "Proud of what?" I retorted. Xie Yin folded her arms and glared at me angrily. "Do you know how difficult it is for Yuxuan? He's an orphan. What you've done has caused him to be expelled from school." Xie Yin was so angry that her face turned red, and her chest heaved violently. I suddenly remembered that in primary school, a girl took my hand and said I was really good looking, and that she would marry me in the future. At that time, Xie Yin was also this angry. She tightly hugged my arm and loudly told that girl, "Zhou Yi will marry me in the future. We will be together forever." Now, however, she has long forgotten her oath and firmly defends another man. I said softly, "Xie Yin, it wasn't me who caused all this. It was you who sneaked into my house and stole my scientific research achievements. It was you who framed me. For the sake of our friendship since childhood, I didn't point you out. But you, for Su Yuxuan, have tried to step on me again and again. Haven't I treated you well enough? Why treat me like this?" Hearing my words, Xie Yin tightly shut her mouth and her eyes evaded. After a long while, she finally spoke. "If you really treated me well, you wouldn't have joined hands with my parents to force me to break up with Yuxuan. If you treated me well, you wouldn't have installed a surveillance camera in the study. If you treated me well, you wouldn't have done this to make me so sad. Your family is so wealthy. What does this bit of reputation matter? You can simply give up developing in the scientific research field. But Yuxuan is different." Xie Yin's voice grew louder and louder. Listening to her such self-righteous words, I felt it was extremely absurd, and just wanted to burst out laughing. Did I deserve to sacrifice myself to fulfill them, just because I treated her well? Just because my family is rich? Does it mean that Su Yuxuan can trample on my reputation and smear me at will? Xie Yin kept accusing me. While I looked at her ferocious appearance, and only found it extremely ridiculous. I had actually liked such a woman for so many years, and even gave up the opportunity to study abroad for her. Looking back now, it was really extremely stupid and not worth mentioning. I interrupted Xiayin. You forget that it was you who proposed installing the camera in the study in the first place. It was already 6 years later, when I set foot on the land of City A again. My parents insisted that I return to China to meet the daughter of one of their cooperative clients in City A, Shen Lanting. They said this client had a close relationship with our family, and was an extremely important partner. They were busy with the docking of some industrial affairs, and could only send me to represent them, so as to show our Zhou family's emphasis on the partner. In fact, I understood their true intentions in my heart. They saw that I had been single for a long time, and were worried that I was still haunted by past feelings. This was just a disguised way of arranging a blind date for me, but I had no intention of falling in love now. That unforgettable love had already exhausted all my courage to love. However, these thoughts did not prevent me from being Jingyan by Shen Lanting's beauty. Shen Lanting was a member of the research institute in City A, and was exquisitely dressed. After learning that I was studying abroad, the light in her eyes became even brighter, and she invited me to participate in a seminar, which I readily agreed to. Before the seminar started, Shen Lanting came to pick me up. She was dressed in formal attire, with her makeup still delicate. Her long curly hair was draped behind her like waves, adding even more charm. Shen Lanting smiled and asked me, "What, do you think my outfit doesn't look like that of a scientific researcher?" I shook my head and said, "The pursuit of beauty is an inborn nature of everyone. Scientific researchers are also human beings, and don't have to confine themselves to a specific mold." The smile in Shen Lanting's eyes became even more intense. During this seminar, I accompanied Shen Lanting throughout. I watched her chatting freely with the bigwigs in the scientific research field. During this period, I also met several old classmates. After a brief conversation with them, they all apologized to me one after another. I understood what they meant in my heart, but I didn't take it to heart. After all, they were also kept in the dark. Shen Lanting seemed to have a rather high status in the research institute, not just an ordinary junior researcher as she claimed. Seeing her drink until her face was flushed, I couldn't help but feel pity, and quickly blocked the wine for her. Those who were toasting Shen Lanting saw this and joked. It seems that our famous beauty of the institute is going to have a destination. Hearing this, Shen Lanting's face became even more crimson, as if it was about to bleed. She swayed and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, I had been keeping an eye on her, and quickly reached out to hold her waist. Just as I was about to say something, a familiar voice suddenly came from behind. "Zhou, you're back?" I turned around, and saw that it was actually Xiayin. Seeing Xiayin again, I had a feeling as if a whole lifetime had passed. Xiayin trotted all the way to me in the surprised eyes of everyone and said, "Zhou, why did you leave without saying goodbye back then? Do you know how scared I was when I couldn't find you? You loved me so much. Why did you treat me like this?" Xiayin's words made the originally lively banquet hall suddenly quiet down. Everyone's eyes curiously shuttled back and forth between us, especially since I was still holding Shen Lanting's slender waist. I could even hear their whispers. "Isn't this Xiayin? I thought she was always that cold-hearted. What a surprise." The person next to Shen Lanting is Zhou. He was the outstanding graduate representative in the year Xiayin graduated. Didn't Xiayin break up with him because of? Why does it seem that Xiayin can't let go? I waved my hand, not wanting to be the focus of everyone's gossip, and not wanting to have any more entanglements with Xiayin. I quickly prepared to leave with Shen Lanting. Let the past be the past. I don't want to say more, but I never expected that my words would make this ice queen in the academic world's eyes turn red. She grabbed my hand and said, "Zhou, did you abandon me just for her?" Seeing everyone's eyes becoming more and more gossipy, I quickly tried to pull my hand back forcefully, but she held it tightly and wouldn't let go. I suddenly felt extremely helpless. My attitude seemed to make Xiayin a bit flustered. She always thought that I would be devoted to her, but she never expected that I had already let her go. She bit her lips tightly and choked. "Zhou, can you not leave me?" Before she could finish her words, she was interrupted by Shen Lanting. Shen Lanting looked at Xiayin unfavorably and said, "No, because he is already with me." Hearing this, Xiayin seemed to be struck by a bolt from the blue, and stared at me in shock. She slowly raised her left hand, revealing the ring on her ring finger, and said in a trembling voice, "Zhou, you're already engaged to me. How can you still be with her? Zhou, didn't you say that the person you love the most in this life is me?" Her fingernails dug deep into my hand, causing severe pain. However, hearing Xiayin's words, an inexplicable smile welled up in my heart. Time flew by. After all these years, Xiayin was still so naive. My eyes fell on the ring on her ring finger, and I couldn't help but recall 6 years ago. I, who was badly hurt by Xiayin, boarded the plane to go abroad under the earnest persuasion of my parents. Before leaving, I resolutely discarded the engagement ring that I had carefully prepared and intended to propose to Xiayin with on the day of the graduation ceremony. After experiencing many changes, I finally clearly realized that Xiayin's heart had never truly belonged to me. Before leaving, I blocked all her contact information. After all, Xiayin had said that if something didn't belong to me, I should return it. I had always obeyed her, so I returned her to her first love. Mentioning Su Yuxuan, a trace of unquenchable resentment flashed in my eyes. In these years away from Xiaoyin, my former infatuation gradually dissipated. Regarding Xiaoyin, my heart was full of complexity. I dared not easily recall, and even less dared to hold hatred. After all, that love had lasted for so many years. But for Su Yuxuan, the instigator, the hatred in my heart had never subsided. At first, I hated his wolfish ambition, deliberately provoking the relationship between me and Xiaoyin, and inducing Xiaoyin to make mistakes. But later, I also gradually understood that Xiaoyin's heart was originally inclined. Even without Su Yuxuan's instigation, the result might not have been much different. At this moment 6 years later, looking at the crying Xiaoyin in front of me, a faint sense of disgust welled up in my heart. I also couldn't figure out why I had such emotions towards her. Perhaps it was disgust for her tears, or perhaps those days of collapse and helplessness, of being isolated, were just too unforgettable. I forcefully broke free from Xiaoyin's hand and said coldly, "Xiaoyin, you said before that if it's not my thing, I have to return it." Hearing my words, Xiaoyin's face instantly turned as pale as paper, but she still persevered and grabbed my hand again, pleading, "Zhou, I can't live without you. Don't leave me." I couldn't help but sneer. "Xiaoyin, who do you think I am? You'd better stop holding me. I'm afraid that Su Yuxuan will frame me for something again later. I'm getting old and can't stand such dotum." Hearing the name Su Yuxuan, Xiaoyin withdrew her hand as if electrocuted and looked at me with teary eyes. At this time, my heart was extremely calm. Although I didn't know what had happened between her and Su Yuxuan in these 6 years, judging from her current reaction, it must not have been a good thing. Otherwise, why would she suddenly remember my kindness to her and come back to pester me? I really didn't want to say another word to her. After all, Uncle Xia and Aunt Xia were kind-hearted people, and I didn't want to embarrass them. Shen Lanting saw that I didn't look well, and quickly grabbed my hand, and led me out of the banquet hall. Feeling the warmth of Shen Lanting's palm, my heart suddenly softened a bit. I couldn't help but think that if someone had been willing to reach out and give me a hand when I was being criticized and isolated by everyone back then, that would have been great. Over the years, I often dreamed of that scene. I was curled up in a dark corner, surrounded by a group of people with ferocious looks. I shouted for help desperately, but no one responded. That sense of despair and helplessness still haunted me. Walking out of the banquet hall, I let out a long sigh of relief and forced a smile, saying to Shen Lanting, "Thank you." Shen Lanting looked at me worriedly and gently shook her head. Just as we were about to leave, Xiaoyin's shout came from behind again. "Zhou, I won't allow you to go with this woman." Xiaoyin walked in a hurry and accidentally fell, looking extremely embarrassed. Seeing my intimate appearance with Shen Lanting, her eyes instantly dimmed and she said softly, "We haven't seen each other for a long time. Can we talk?" I sneered contemptuously, and my disgust for Xiaoyin's appearance grew stronger. What else was there to talk about? Talk about how she colluded with Su Yuxuan to frame me for plagiarizing scientific research achievements back then? Or talk about how she overturned my testimony after I proved my innocence? Or talk about how she added insult to injury to me and my uncle in front of all the teachers and students in the school? Once I was hopelessly in love with Xiaoyin, even though I knew that there was still a shadow of Su Yuxuan in her heart, when she asked me, "Zhou, do you like me? Can you be with me?" I still chose to agree without hesitation, like a moth flying into the fire. But what I got in return was such a heartless betrayal. I couldn't even imagine that if there hadn't been that crucial surveillance video at that time, whether I would have been completely discredited, and whether my uncle would have been implicated because of me. What on earth did I do wrong? Was it also my fault to love Xiaoyin? Why should I suffer such treatment from them? Those days of being criticized by everyone were like a long and dark nightmare, extremely difficult to endure. And during that time, Xiaoyin never stood by my side to support me. She, like everyone else, watched indifferently as I fell into a difficult situation. I was never afraid of other people's eyes. All I desired was just Xiaoyin's support. But, thinking of these, I curled my lips in disgust and didn't respond. Sensing the disgust in my eyes, Xiaoyin subconsciously wanted to pull my hand again, just like in the past when we hadn't fallen out. At that time, every time she wanted something, she would pull my hand and act coquettishly. And as long as it was a request she made, I would agree to it one by one. But now I just felt full of nausea. I was just about to dodge Xiaoyin's touch when Shen Lanting, with quick eyes and hands, grabbed Xiaoyin's hand and threw it away forcefully. Our actions completely enraged Xiaoyin. She was a bit on the verge of collapse and cried out, questioning me. "Why have you changed? Why don't you love me anymore? Why do you like someone else?" I looked at Xiaoyin's collapsed appearance and said coldly, "Xiaoyin, don't be so selfish. You already have Su Yuxuan, so don't come and provoke me anymore. You might as well resent me for breaking up you and Su Yuxuan like before. I don't want to have any more connections with you." Hearing my words, Xiaoyin became even more collapsed. She slumped powerlessly to the ground and covered her face, crying loudly. "No, Su Yuxuan lied to me. He did something wrong. My parents found out. And he actually lied to me, saying that it was you who set up the game. I was wrong, Zhou. I really know I was wrong. Can you forgive me?" However, what greeted her was only my resolute departing figure. Originally, I planned to return to Country M after the seminar, but my parents insisted that I stay in City A for a few more days. Unable to refuse their sincere invitation, I had to stay temporarily. These days, either I sent things to Shen Lanting, or she came to talk to me about company cooperation matters. Before long, I discerned the intentions of Shen Lanting's parents and my own parents. Apparently, Shen Lanting also understood, yet she behaved with great poise, showing no signs of uneasiness at all. My relationship with Shen Lanting became increasingly intimate. I originally intended to pick her up for dinner after she got off work. But when I thought that she and Xia Yin were colleagues, and I really didn't want to see Xia Yin's face again, I had to ask Shen Lanting to come to me instead. One day, Shen Lanting and I went to have Western food together. I attentively cut the steak for her, and Shen Lanting took it with a smile. After eating a few bites, she suddenly looked at me with a strange expression and said, "You know, these days Xia Yin has been pestering me, trying to get me to give her your phone number." I quickly waved my hand and said anxiously, "No, definitely don't give it to her." Seeing my flustered look, Shen Lanting couldn't help but smile sweetly, and glared at me coquettishly. "You don't know how annoying she has been these days. She comes to me every day, saying how much you loved her before, and how you were willing to do anything for her. Between the lines, she's insinuating that I'm stealing your love. She's almost pointing her finger at my nose, and calling me a mistress." I never expected that Xia Yin would have become like this. I was so frightened that cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Looking at Shen Lanting, who was suffering innocently because of me, I felt extremely guilty and said sheepishly, "I'm sorry to have involved you. I really feel bad. Or you'd better give her my phone number to save her from bothering you all the time." Shen Lanting smiled again. Looking at her like that, I actually find it quite interesting. You don't know, she's the famous ice beauty in our research institute. Now everyone admires me so much, saying that I've actually managed to melt the ice beauty. As she was talking and laughing, she accidentally got some steak sauce on the corner of her mouth. I subconsciously took out a tissue and gently wiped it off for her. In an instant, both of us froze, and then our faces turned bright red in an instant. Just as we were at a loss, Xia Yin's sharp voice suddenly rang out. "Zhou, what are you doing?" I was startled and quickly withdrew my hand, looking at Xia Yin with affected calm. I saw Xia Yin standing not far away, wearing a white dress, looking at us with a face full of sadness, as if it were a heinous crime for me to have a meal with Shen Lanting. Seeing Xia Yin, I felt extremely headache. The charming appearance of Xia Yin in the past had gradually blurred in my heart. At this moment, what emerged in my mind were only the years of her indifference towards me. I really didn't want to meet her, because every time I saw her, I couldn't help but recall the tragic situation of being alone and helpless that year. Xia Yin rushed over, her eyes filled with tears, and asked in a sobbing voice, "Zhou, don't you love me anymore?" I looked at Xia Yin. She was still as beautiful and charming as before, exactly the same. But her eyes at this moment made me feel extremely strange. I had never seen her look at me with such affectionate eyes before. In the past, the way she looked at me was always full of hostility and coldness. If it were the me of the past, seeing Xia Yin with such affectionate eyes would have made me extremely happy. But now, I was no longer the Zhou who was willing to unreservedly offer my whole heart to Xia Yin. My heart had already been mercilessly trampled into the dirt by Xia Yin and completely died. Hearing Xia Yin ask such a question again, I only found it extremely absurd. What was she doing all this time? Do people always only know how to cherish after they lose? Unfortunately, I no longer cared. I was no longer the person who could give everything for a smile from Xia Yin. However, seeing Xia Yin crying so sadly, my heart still couldn't help but twinge slightly. I also didn't understand why I had such a feeling. I knew clearly in my heart that I no longer had any feelings for Xia Yin. I said in a flat tone, "Xia Yin, 6 years ago, I forced myself to let go of you and stop loving you. Now, I really don't love you anymore. Let's both be decent and stop contacting each other, okay?" Xia Yin shook her head desperately, crying and saying no. I felt extremely helpless, and so did Shen Lanting. She didn't know the specific past between me and Xia Yin. She only learned from those who knew the inside story before that Xia Yin had treated me extremely badly. Seeing Xia Yin in such a humble state now, she didn't know what to say. Just seeing my helpless look, she sighed softly and said to Xia Yin, "Xia Yin, you and Zhou are already in the past." Before Shen Lanting could finish her words, Xia Yin glared at her viciously and cursed. "What are you pretending to be nice for? If it weren't for you, Zhou wouldn't have left me, you bitch." Hearing Xia Yin insult Shen Lanting like this, I could no longer sit still. I immediately stood up and pulled Shen Lanting behind me to protect her. Xia Yin's eyes were red with anger. Without thinking, she picked up the coffee on the table and splashed it towards Shen Lanting. I quickly hastened to block in front of Shen Lanting, and the scalding coffee poured all over my head and face. Seeing me protect Shen Lanting like this, Xia Yin was heartbroken. I wiped the sticky coffee off my face and took the tissue handed to me by Shen Lanting. Looking at the disheartened Xia Yin, I said coldly, "Xia Yin, my separation from you has nothing to do with Shen Lanting. Even my leaving you wasn't because of Su Yuxuan. You actually know very well in your heart what exactly made me leave resolutely. Now I've made everything clear. Don't come looking for me anymore. When I was 15 years old, I wanted to confess my love to you. But you said you only regarded me as a relative, so I had to bury my love for you in my heart and follow you to University A. You don't know that I could have chosen to study at a university in Country M. but I gave up this opportunity for you. However, I never mentioned this to you, not wanting to bind you with it. Later, I watched you be with Su Yuxuan and saw you gradually alienate me because of his instigation, and I never complained. After that, you broke up with Su Yuxuan and asked me if I liked you and whether I wanted to be with you. I knew clearly that you hadn't let go of Su Yuxuan, but I still chose to be with you. When he framed me, you didn't stand by my side, and I forgave your ignorance of the truth. But the truth is that you took Su Yuxuan to plagiarize my scientific research achievements. I looked at Xie Yin's pale face and her staggering figure, and hardened my heart. Closing my eyes, I continued, I gave you countless chances, Xie Yin. It was you who didn't know how to cherish. Since I made these words clear to Xie Yin in the Western restaurant, Xie Yin became much quieter. She not only stopped pestering me, but also took a long leave from the research institute, without saying when she would come back. At this time, the research institute was in the busy stage of researching an important project. Xie Yin's sudden departure greatly increased everyone's workload. Shen Lanting had to stay up late and work overtime every day. I felt extremely distressed and had to wait for her to get off work in the coffee shop downstairs every day. My parents said that it was not safe for a girl to work the night shift alone, and I had to take good care of her. In fact, what motivated me to want to pick up and drop off Shen Lanting from work was not just my parents' request. I sincerely hoped that she could have a moment of relaxation and comfort during her busy work. Every time I saw Shen Lanting walking out of the science and technology building with a tired look on her face, I would always rush forward quickly. Seeing that she was so busy that she didn't even have time to dress up carefully, my heart was filled with pity. Even with a bare face, she still couldn't hide her beauty. Seeing her so tired, in addition to feeling sorry for her, I actually felt a sense of resentment towards Xie Yin. I realized that I had really let go of Xie Yin. Otherwise, why would I resent her because of someone else? If it were the me of the past, I would never have imagined that I would one day resent Xie Yin. I gently handed her a cup of steaming milk tea. Shen Lanting got into the passenger seat and excitedly told me the interesting things that happened in the research institute today. Suddenly, she seemed to have a flash of inspiration. Her eyes lit up instantly, and she stared at me intently, saying, "Oh, how could I forget you, the scientific research genius? I'm really so busy that I'm dizzy. Please, Brother Zhou, can you help us out?" As she spoke, she put her hands together and playfully acted coquettishly towards me. I couldn't help but laugh, and then nodded in agreement. In fact, I had long been looking forward to helping Shen Lanting. But these 6 years I had been abroad, and there were many inconveniences. It was really inappropriate to speak rashly. It was as if I was bound by layers of shackles. Shen Lanting happily dialed the phone of the dean. I originally thought that this matter would go through many complicated procedures, but unexpectedly, the dean readily agreed. With my participation, the project progressed like a shot, greatly accelerating. Shen Lanting no longer had to work until the middle of the night every day. She gradually had the leisure to tidy herself up. The researchers in the research institute admired me very much. The dean even privately asked me if I was willing to return to the country for development. However, I fell into hesitation. For me, Sidia was like a scar that was difficult to heal, the source of my sadness. Even though I no longer cared about Xie Yin now, deep in my heart, I still subconsciously resisted this land. It carried too many memories that made me extremely painful. During my university years, under the deliberate instigation of Su Yuxuan, I was isolated by my classmates. Their cold and distant eyes were like sharp knives, deeply piercing my heart. At that time, I could only closely follow Xie Yin's side, obtaining a glimmer of comfort and strength from her. Even after the truth was revealed and everyone knew that I was not a rich second generation who relied on power, and they apologized to me, the past trauma still made me subconsciously fear this place. I said to the dean, "Let me think about it." The dean didn't force me. He just stuffed a thick red envelope into my hand. Unexpectedly, I heard about Xie Yin's news again from her parents. They already knew the reason why I broke up with Xie Yin and went to study in Country M. They felt extremely guilty, but dared not face me directly. They could only inquire about my recent situation from my parents time and time again. Knowing that I was doing well, they felt a little relieved. In fact, I wanted to tell them that this was all Xie Yin's problem and had nothing to do with them. But at that time, I was in a terrible mood and extremely resistant to everything related to Xie Yin. So in these 6 years, I had never contacted Xie Yin's parents. Now that I had let go of Xie Yin, I originally planned to call them and have a good chat. But during this period, Shen Lanting and I were busy with the project and really couldn't find the time. Until Father Xie's call came. After nearly 6 years, I heard Father Xie's voice again. His voice was still kind and gentle, but there was a hint of hoarseness. He said, "Xiaoyi, alas, forget it. How are you recently?" Father Xie's abrupt change of topic made my heart tighten suddenly, and I hurriedly asked what had happened. After my repeated urgent inquiries, Father Xie finally spoke. "Yinin is seriously ill. She wants to see you, but after thinking about it, I still don't think you should come. This is all her own doing. Let her bear it herself." After hanging up the phone, an inexplicable sadness welled up in my heart. I had thought that I and Xie Yin would completely break off contact and become strangers. But when I heard the news of her serious illness, my heart still felt a twinge of confusion. At this moment, when I thought of Xie Yin, What emerged in my mind were the happy times we spent together, before Su Yuxuan appeared. People are, after all, complex animals. Shen Lanting saw that I had been in a trance and frequently distracted after answering the phone, and she was very worried. I truthfully told her about this matter and asked Winnow why. If I don't go, I really feel sorry for the love and care that Father Xia and Mother Xia have given me for more than 20 years. But if I go, I really feel uncomfortable in my heart. It's a dilemma. Shen Lanting suddenly stretched out her arms and hugged me tightly. Then she slowly talked about the past. You and Xia Yin probably both forgot. When we were kids, I had a fight with Xia Yin. At that time, I told you that I would marry you when I grew up. Xia Yin was very angry and fought with me. In fact, I have always been secretly paying attention to you. You had excellent grades and were handsome. You naturally had no impression of me. After all, I was from a neighboring school. Later, I embarked on the path of scientific research. At first, it was because you liked it, so I also wanted to try. But when I really set foot on this path, I discovered that I really loved scientific research. Shen Lanting gently sighed and said softly, let me accompany you to see Xia Yin. She seemed to see through the entanglement in my heart. I was just being stubborn and unwilling to give in easily. Shen Lanting and I went to the hospital together. When we saw Father Xia and Mother Xia, they had obviously aged a lot. Their hair had turned completely white. Looking at the surprised and guilty expressions in their eyes, my heart was filled with mixed feelings. Shen Lanting didn't go in with me. She just held my hand tightly, giving me silent but firm encouragement. Xia Yin was so thin that she was just skin and bones. She was lying on the hospital bed, looking extremely weak. Her hair was sparse and lifeless. When she saw me, a light instantly lit up in her eyes, and she said softly, Zhou Yi, you came to see me. I slowly sat down beside her hospital bed. Looking at her weak appearance, a sharp pain shot through my heart. All the previous resentment and grievances instantly dissipated without a trace. Xia Yin's voice was weak, but filled with an unprecedented calm. Don't be sad. Life, old age, illness, and death are all normal parts of life. She stared at me intently, with a greedy look in her eyes, as if she wanted to deeply imprint my appearance in her heart. After a long time, she slowly said, in fact, when you left City A, I didn't feel anything special in my heart, because at that time my heart was full of Su Yuxuan. But later, after I had a falling out with my parents and lived with Su Yuxuan, I realized that he was not at all what he seemed on the surface. He was selfish and self-centered. Being with me was just to covet the resources on my side. My second breakup with Su Yuxuan made a big stir. It was my parents, and your uncle and aunt, who came forward to help me solve the trouble. But they must be very angry, so they have been unwilling to talk to me. This is my retribution. I found your ring. I thought that as long as I kept it well, you would definitely come back. She struggled to raise her hand, and the ring on her hand shone brightly. She smiled at me faintly. Where's Shen Lanting? Call her in. Don't worry, I won't make things difficult for her. I called Shen Lanting in. Xia Yin looked at the radiant Shen Lanting, and a trace of envy flashed in her eyes. She coughed a few times and painstakingly told Shen Lanting everything I had experienced at that time. Looking at the heartache in Shen Lanting's eyes, Xia Yin actually smiled with relief. Xia Yin said, let this ring go with me. This was left to me by Zhou Yi, who loved me the most. Shen Lanting, I entrust the present Zhou Yi to you. When I walked out of the hospital, Father Xia thanked me with a choked voice. Looking at his slightly hunched back, my heart was filled with bitterness. I could only tell him that if there was anything I could help with, just ask. Father Xia said it's okay. Inin's brother has already taken leave. Shen Lanting and I strolled on the street, looking at the people coming and going bustling. When we came to a park, the Chinese roses in the park were in full bloom. Shen Lanting suddenly stopped and looked at me saying, Zhou Yi, do you want to try being with me? Just as I was about to speak, Shen Lanting didn't wait for me to say anything and continued. I know you may not have the courage to love now, but I do. I also believe that you are not the kind of person who is stuck in the past. She gently sighed and added, I'm sorry, Zhou Yi. I came too late. I stared at Shen Lanting, and suddenly smiled brightly. The burden in my heart seemed to have been completely lifted at this moment. I tightly held her hand and said, it's not too late. Everything is just right.